So welcome everyone to Leading Tech Teams in Uncertain Times. Today's talk, uh, I will take you on a little bit of a journey, both a journey of our industry as a whole and then industry of the last year, 2023. So as you hear, it might not be one of those feel-good talks that leaves you happy and inspired, but I'll do my best anyway. You will learn how our landscape has changed over the past years and what skills you as a technology leader need in order to lead your team in this new landscape. And lastly, I'll go over 5 concrete things you can actually implement to stay on track, even if nothing else does. So let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. I can't see all of you right now. I don't know what the demographic for this talk is. So I don't know how many of you were around in the late 90s, dot-com bubble. That was the golden rush of our industry, just with less pickaxes and more caffeine. Like everyone was launching the next big thing. And those that weren't, they were throwing money at everyone else. We call them investors. And we got brilliant ideas from that era, like pets.com and boo.com, which was one of the world's first online fashion retailers. Those ideas weren't bad. They were just too early because nobody was ready to buy pet food and fashion online in the late 90s. And then we had, of course, a bunch of truly, truly bad ideas, but they were also getting funded. So since there was more money than companies could spend, revenue was not something people were thinking about. It wasn't really on anybody's mind. The metric that everybody was measuring their business by was eyeballs. How much attention can we get on our product? And the more attention they got, the more money they got. So this created a circle where all of these overfunded companies could through cash for anything that they see fit. This included parties, glamorous events, helicopters, jet skis, company outings on the beach, surf trips for everybody. It was almost like nobody was actually working on the product. Stock prices just kept soaring because more and more people were attracted to all of these products. But nobody was really making any profit, or very few companies were making profit. So who would have thought it would all eventually come crashing down? That's exactly what happened. In early 2000s, some investors started going like, hey, you know that money we gave you? When are we going to see some of the returns on that? And that it all just burst like an overinflated balloon. And with that came the stop of the fun days, the jet skis, the parties, the company outings on the beach. From then on, we were talking business plans, profits, ROI, estimates, roadmaps for the next 20 years. So we created structure in the industry. Sabine already introduced me, so I'm going to skip that part. But what's relevant here is I started working in 2003, which means I was not part of the golden days. I wasn't there to see it happen. I was part of the cleanup crew. I was part of the people that came afterwards and had to deal with the mess. So by the time I entered the workforce, we already had all the roadmaps, we had the Gantt charts, we had budgets, we had specs, and we had to think about profits and revenue for the products we were building. And at the time, all of those slow-moving, very complicated structures actually worked. It worked because the industry was moving quite slowly and at a very predictable pace. That was the name of the game. Like one of my first jobs, I used to ship software on CDs. And if we have any very young people in the crowd, CDs are these things you see here. They have data on them, 720 megabytes of data, or 640, depending on which one you got. And I'm not talking about the CDs that you burnt on your own home computer. I'm talking about the CDs that went to factories and were pressed. And then when they were pressed, they were put into jewel cases, they were put into boxes together with manuals. And the boxes were shrink wrapped and sent to clients. Which means we shipped like once every year or so, because that was the cadence of our releases. And by the time we shipped, the product had to be pristine, it had to be perfect, tested, because it had to be perfect and tested. So we worked with all the roadmaps and the phases and the very detailed specs. I used to get a binder on my desk that specified the exact functions I was supposed to write as a C++ developer. And nobody wanted to be responsible for a day one hotfix, which meant that inside of the nice box with the software and the manual, we would ship a little note telling the client, I'm sorry, dear client, but the first thing you have to do after installing the software is to go to this URL and download a patch. You didn't want to be the person that was responsible for that note. So we worked with the roadmaps, we worked with the phases, we worked with the detailed specs and the immaculate QA team in order to make this software perfect. But since then, times have changed. Our context has expanded, and the demand for new, up-to-date, here and now is much higher. And we just can't plan for any of it anymore. So today, we want new features as things happen in the world. As something new unfolds or new technology comes on or a disruption happens, we want our software to have the new things then and there. And we also have the infrastructure with high-speed internet to push out the updates in real time. So the old ways of working are not really supporting the way the world is looking today. So to illustrate this, let's just take a look back at last year. We started the last year with this crazy economical uncertainty and recession. Then after that, Twitter just continues to go crazy with, all the Elon Musk craziness. And now it's not even Twitter anymore, it's X. And it's created a whole new era of apps like Blue Sky and Threads and all of these new things that are supposed there to replace Twitter and take their market share. The Ukrainian war keeps dragging on. We're about in February now. And then all of a sudden we have a Turkey-Syria earthquake. By March, we have AI enter the chat with ChatGPT and all the cool stuff coming from there. And then in March, Silicon Valley Bank fails, which sends ripples throughout the whole tech industry. After that, First Republic Bank in the US also fails, but that's not as impactful as Silicon Valley Bank, even if it's a much bigger thing. You might think that everything is going to slow down now, but then we see Greece, Hawaii, Canada have wildfires from July to August, and please tell me climate change isn't real. And if you do, global warming, because in August, the oceans reach a new world record high temperature. And on top of that, we get the Morocco earthquake in September. Oh, since this year is going so well, the European Central Bank just goes like, hey, everybody's having a really nice time, so let's set interest rates to an all-time high in September, because cool. And then, the biggest tragedy happens is the Israeli-Hamas war sends ripples throughout Gaza and Israel and Palestine, and creates a lot of suffering for everyone down there. And then we have Iceland that's hit by an earthquake in November with volcano eruptions in December. And, as a Christmas gift, ChatGPT updates its data set to include everything up until April 2023. And that's only 2023. We're 3 months into 2024, and it really hasn't slowed down. So, yeah, everything's just going great. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is not to make you all depressed and think that everything is really, really bad. It's just to illustrate that if you think back on the roadmap that was presented for your team at the beginning of the year, was any of this on your roadmap? Did you calculate for any of these things? Probably not. And yet, one or several of these things did affect your team and the product you're working on. So this is the point I'm trying to make. We can't plan for everything. We can't have a roadmap for everything. So we need a different way of leading. We are not shipping software on CD-ROMs anymore. So what are we looking for this year? So what's going to happen this year? Well, of course, we have all of these cool analytical companies, and you're all here to get the answer of what are the key trends in 2024. So because you don't have to, I went and I read all the reports. No, I didn't. It doesn't make any sense. I fed all the reports into an AI tool, and I asked the AI tool what the key trends, given all of these reports, would be for the upcoming year. You can't see the animation. It doesn't matter. I mean, it was. I did get a few really. Let's see if we can do it here. That's good. There he goes. There it goes. Right. So, if you can read this, the tool wasn't that off. It's not crazy. The problem is even if any of these things are on your roadmap, they're probably wrong anyway. So we've moved into this era over the last couple of years where we need to talk about this concept of preparedness over planning. So it's not that planning is not important. Of course, we need plans. It's just that preparedness is more important. Because the reason we end up in crazy situations is that we constantly miss the mark. We've optimized all of our stuff for the world moving in a certain direction. And when it doesn't, the plans fail. And we don't have the skills to replan from where we're going. So we need to build organizations not around following plans and following roadmaps, but we need to build the organization in order to be able to respond to the changes happening in the current context. And we need to plan for our products to be able to pivot in the direction that we need. So this means creating diverse teams that are optimized for solving problems and not factories of knowledge workers that are built to deliver features. You can't come to your team and deliver binders of, here are the problems I want you to solve. So what do we do in uncertainty? Do we rise up to the challenge and tackle the problem as it arises where we stand? We don't. Statistically, what most organizations do when they're faced with uncertainty and when they're faced with things that were not in the plan is that they sit down and try to formulate a plan, right? So the organization is not optimized for preparedness. It's not optimized for autonomy and being able to solve the problem as it arises where it arises. Because when it happens, we say, let's sit down in a room and figure out a new plan. And once that plan is done, a new disruption has hit our team, and that plan isn't relevant anymore. So let's take it back to that project I was talking about where we shipped stuff on CD-ROMs, where I said everything was working. Everything wasn't working. It was mostly working until it at one point wasn't, where we did have a potential issue that would jeopardize the whole release we were working on. So basically, if we couldn't figure this out, everything would be pushed. So production schedules of the CD-ROMs would be pushed. And you might think, well, hey, that's not a problem. We're just going to send out the boxes a few days later. Problem is, you book these factories. You book them in advance. So you better have the stuff ready. And then you book all the conferences you're supposed to go to. You book all the trade shows. You book everything depending on the release date. So missing the release date is a huge problem. So at that point, the company could have said, let's everybody just gather around and formulate a plan. But that's not what happened. Or rather, that's not what our project manager did. Our project manager gathered a small subset of the team, locked us in a room, and asked us one single question. She says, what do you need in order to get this done? And our answer was pizza. Not only pizza, of course. We did demand pizza, but we also demanded all our computers. We had stationary computers to be moved into the same room. We demanded a few whiteboards, and we wanted to be able to work overtime, to be let into the building evenings and the nights, and of course be compensated for it. And she said, all right, it's done. Like, we're going to make that happen. And we did solve the problem. It was one of the most stressful, but yet also one of the most fun experiences of my career, to just go out and be able to solve an issue and have a project manager who's fully understandable, supportive, and there for us. In that situation, there was a lot of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity and ambiguity, because we're not only talking about uncertainty here. Uncertainty is only one of the 4 vectors. So this is a framework called VUCA, which I learned from a woman called Eva Lauren, and that I incorporated into this talk because I think it perfectly illustrates what we're talking about here. So when we talk about volatility, it's that things change quickly, and that things change quickly. So when we want to deal with volatility, we need to set a direction, and so what our project manager did to deal with the volatility was she set a direction and she let us volunteer for the task. Uncertainty means we don't know what to do. And what she did was she provided us with enough context to be able to discover the solution to the problem on our own. She told us about what happens when the release is late, and then she let us figure out how to make that work. Complexity, that's when you have many parameters, complex environments and technologies. So what she did is she put up constraints to narrow down the problem. Like, this is the one thing we need to get fixed. Like, don't focus on anything else. And ambiguity is when you have no clear right or wrong, up and down. So, you need to be able to look at the problem from a lot of different perspectives. And this is where I think she was really smart, because she handpicked the people on the team to create as many perspectives as possible. She picked people from QAs, backends, front ends, designers, business analysts. She made sure that we weren't overstaffed, but we had enough perspectives in order to solve the problem. So this model, the VUCA model, was actually created by the US military after the Cold War. And it was created in order to describe the new world state, the state with no specific enemy, which was fueled by this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So given this, what do I think we as technology leaders need in order to lead our teams in 2024 and beyond? The number one thing that I think we need is to deal with uncertainty. And dealing with uncertainty means leading with context. So let me tell you a story about leading with context and how that looks. So in 1930, Gandhi set out on a walk called the Salt March. And he was only accompanied by a few dozen followers and walked almost 400 kilometers. The reason he did this was because because the British rule had said that nobody outside the British were allowed to distill salt. And Gandhi was like, yeah, that salt monopoly doesn't really make any sense, because creating salt is one of the most natural things that you can do, and it's also a huge industry in India. So he set out on this salt march with only a few dozen followers. And every time he stopped in a village, he told the people why he was doing the walk. And more people joined. And then he continued walking. And stopped in the next village, he talked about it again, talking about how this monopoly on salt is illegal and why he's doing the march. And as he reached his destination, he did that one act that was illegal. As he was talking, he evaporated seawater to create salt. This was the one illegal act. Of course, he was eventually arrested for this, But over the upcoming months, his actions gathered more than 60,000 followers, evaporating salt all over India. And this forced the government into talks in order to settle a better solution to this problem. So what Gandhi did was he set out a direction. He says, this is what I'm doing. He went first, and then he got people to voluntarily move with him. This is what we call leading with context. So how you do this in your teams, it's really comes down to how your company is structured. So you need to have a really clear company mission. What are you here for? Why are you put on the planet? And what problem are you trying to solve for the world and your customers? Once you have that, you can talk about the product, the vision, and principles. So this is the vision of our product. This is what we want our product to be in the next 5 to 10 years. You can do that through writing documents, or you can do that for doing cool videos. It doesn't matter as long as it sparks something within the people and the teams. And then you have to have a set of guiding principles. These are the values we believe in. We believe in ethics over profits, for instance. That's a great thing to put in one of your principles. Or anything else that helps the team make the decisions there and then without having to escalate everything. And then you have a product strategy. And the product strategy is much more short term. It's more of, this is the problem we're working on right now. One of my absolutely favorite product strategies, which I don't know if it's true, if it's an urban legend, was when Daniel Ek at Spotify says, we have a problem with radio because the radio is taking our listeners. So, through the next cycle, we're going to focus on taking market share from radio. And that sparked something in all of the teams. And then the teams, they work on their specific products, so they have to get problems to solve instead of features to build. Meaning that design, product, and tech need to work together to figure out what's the best set of things, given the product strategy, the product vision, and the principles we can work on in the next cycle. And make sure that those problems are real business problems or real client problems. We don't want fake problems. So real problems are things like, we're losing market share to our competitors, or we're having a lot of people drop out in the checkout process. Those are real problems. Now, you don't have to come up with a solution. You give the team the problem, and then you watch them work their magic. The next one that I'm going to talk about here is volatility. And the best way to deal with volatility is to enable discovery inside of your teams. It's to have teams that are really good at discovering new solutions when things shift, when things move. So this man here, this is Benny Anderson of ABBA fame, but he also did a bunch of other stuff. He's written music for big concerts and other musicians, done a bunch of other musical projects. So in an interview with Benny, he says he ships about 20 hours of music every year. That's it. 20 hours of music. That's everything he ships every year. And they ask him, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you know which 20 hours are good, like which ones you're going to ship? And he says, well, the way I do it is I spent 8 hours every day discovering, playing, trying, figuring out what works, what doesn't, testing. And doing this through 8 hours every day over a full year amounts to 20 hours of product. But then I know that that's a good product. The reason I'm telling you this story is not that I want your teams to spend most of their time discovering things. It's more so you can reflect in the context of this, how much time does your team actually spend on discovery? How much time do you put into discovering versus delivering product? So when we talk about discovery, this is the way I see it. To deal with volatility, we need to be able to work in these two different distinct flows. And this is not, one phase, second phase. These two things have to happen in parallel all the time in every team. And this is a page from Hendrik Neberg's book, and I'm using it to illustrate something else than he is trying to illustrate. Because if you look at the top arrow where it says discovery, a lot of people within the Agile community use this to illustrate how we iterate product. The problem with this is if you look at the person at number 1, that's a really sad person. They're not at all happy with the skateboard. A little bit more happier with the kick bike, but they're not really super happy until they get the car. So in today's society, with all the volatility, all the competition in our markets, we can't afford to ship skateboards to our clients. We have to ship product that's robust and actually solves their needs. So when what I say discovery, what I mean is we need to have these rapid iterations in the discovery phase. We need to try the skateboard, be like, hey, was this what you wanted? No, it's a kick bike, it's this and this and this. And we do that by user testing. Then once we figured out it's the car the user wants, we let the team build it the way it's supposed to be built. Because it's really hard to turn a skateboard into a car, regardless of how hard you try. Maybe you could use the wood for the dashboard. But you're just simply not going to iterate a skateboard into a car. Building a car requires something else. So the tech team needs to know what we're doing in order to build it properly. All right. Next one up is working with constraints. And this speaks directly to dealing with complexity, because when we have complexity, there's too many things to watch out for. So having constraints is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Here's Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger from Rolling Stones fame, but also from TikTok fame with moves like Jagger. And the thing with Jagger's dance is that it actually came about because of constraints. Now, when the Rolling Stones were starting out, they were playing all of these small clubs. And once they set up all the speakers and guitars and everything, there was only about 1 square meter where Mick Jagger could move. But, Mick is a showman. So he decided that, regardless of if I only have this little space, I'm going to try to put on a kick-ass show for the audience. So he used that space in the best way he could. And this is how he came up with his very unique dance style. So had that constraint not existed, had Mick Jagger had infinite stage room, those moves would have never been created. And maybe the Rolling Stones wouldn't have been as famous as they were. And it's really interesting because there's rarely such a thing as an unlimited playing field. In anything worth building, anything worth designing, it's essential to understand that there will be constraints. No architect, and I'm talking about like the architects that build building, has unlimited land, unlimited time, or unlimited money. So great design is the art of kind of identifying those crippling constraints and then kind of working with them. So it's getting out of the if I only had mentality. So the best thing about this is, as this story illustrates and a lot of other stories illustrates, is putting constraints around things, making them smaller, making them more concrete, actually helps you deal with the complexity. All right. Last one in the VUCA matrix is the A, the ambiguity. Now, when I do this talk live, I usually have the audience shout out what they see in the next picture. Now, we can't do that, but if you all get your chats ready, just write the first thing you see in the next picture. I can't see the chat, but I'm guessing we're seeing a lot of rabbits and ducks.
Yes, rabbit, duck, bird, both.
Bird, both.
Choose your poison.
Choose your poison. This is precisely what ambiguity looks like. There's no clear way of viewing things. And if you stare at this picture long enough, you can see both the duck and the rabbit. But here comes the next one. Write in the chat what this is. What did we get?
A bomb.
See, I always get a bomb. I always get a bomb. It's not. In 2015, a 14-year-old kid called Ahmed Muhammad built this in his house. It's an alarm clock. He was really proud of what he built, so he decided to take it to school to show his engineering teacher. His engineering teacher understood what it was, but told Ahmed that, Ahmed, please put this away and don't show it to anybody else. Because he understood the ambiguity in the situation, how this can be misunderstood. Unfortunately, Ahmed didn't listen to his teacher. So in English class, he wanted to show this to a bunch of friends. The English teacher, not an engineering teacher, doesn't have the background, panics and calls the police. And Ahmed was arrested and suspended for 3 days from his school. Now, this is the problem with ambiguity. Depending on your background and knowledge, we view things differently. There's no clear-cut scenario, whether it's the duck or it's the rabbit. And the best way as leaders to deal with ambiguity is to work with this whole concept of culture add. It's about getting people on our team that have a diverse set of gender, education, culture background, socioeconomical backgrounds. So when we see things that aren't clear, we can get as many perspectives on that as possible. The more people with different backgrounds we have, the better equipped our team is to deal with the ambiguity. I'm going to tell you a story about this woman. This is Esther Blenda Nordstrom. So Nordstrom began her career as a journalist in the early 1900s, when female reporters were a rarity in Sweden. In 1914, she embarked on a daring journey to uncover how assignments, to uncover how maids in Sweden were exploited. She did this by going undercover, by soiling her hands with dirt and making herself look like a maid and taking up employment as a maid. Through this, she discovered the mistreatment of domestic workers throughout Sweden, and it resulted in a lot of reports and a very influential book called A Maid Among Maids. So she actually pioneered the method of journalism, going undercover and creating reporting from the inside. A method that was, in the 1970s, attributed to a man, as a lot of these stories unfortunately go. But Nordstrom's reporting also covered topics such as education, healthcare, social issues, contributing to in social issues, and she really did contribute to the awareness of women's rights and social injustices in Sweden. Now, the thing is, these are things that only Esther or a person like Esther could have done, because no man would have ever could have done any of this type of reporting. So this is exactly why we need to have this type of diversity inside of our teams, because this is how we will be able to fuel things to the next level. Now, that was the 4 elements of the VUCA matrix, but there's actually another thing that's really, really important when we deal with these complex and uncertain situations. And it's the muscle to start again. Because the thing is, what's going to happen is we will fail. And we will fail now more often than we used to fail. So being able to brush that failure off and start again is going to be one of the most important skills we've ever had. So this is Taylor Swift. Now, regardless of what you think of Taylor's music, she is a complete freaking powerhouse. She's a skilled artist, skilled businesswoman that simply doesn't give up, or at least has this ability to constantly bounce back. Early in her career, Swift was rejected several times, often for her young age, or specifically her music style, from a lot of record labels. She didn't give up. She managed to convince her family to relocate in order to pursue her music career. And this was at age 14. And this was at age 14. And then her career has been a ton of beatdowns, yet she managed to start again every single time to find a new creative solution to the problem. When she didn't manage to buy back her back catalog, I'm sure you all heard this story, it's a fabulous story. When she didn't manage to buy back her back catalog, she decided to re-record all the albums on that catalog. And the re-release of those songs, she joined Dolly Parton as the only artist to hit charts with both the original and re-recorded song. That's the power of Taylor Swift. Now, what is it Taylor Swift understands that the rest of us don't? Well, the thing is, in order to be able to do this type of creative thinking, this type of mental gymnastics, you have to have a lot of creativity. The problem is creativity is kind of removed from us by the school system. In 1968, a man called George Land, together with a woman called Beth Jarman, conducted research studying the test of creativity in children. They took 1,600 children ranging from the ages from 3 to 5 years old and gave them NASA's test for creativity. This is the test that NASA uses in order to select the most innovative engineers and scientists to work on the space program. So at 5 years old, 98% of the children scored on genius levels in the test for creativity. At 10, we were down to 30%. And when tested at 15 years, it was only 12. Then they took a bunch of 31-year-olds and they gave them the same test, and only 2% of 31-year-olds score at genius levels in this test. So the problem here isn't that we as people lack the way to think creatively about our problem solving and take different vantage points and bounce back and start again. It's basically that we've been taught that there is a specific solution for every problem, and we should look for the best practice, or we should look for the path that's already been taken. So we are not out there looking for new solutions. We're not out there looking for new creative ways of solving the problems we encounter. We're going and asking, what did other people do when they had this problem? But when the context is shifting, when we deal with all this uncertainty, when the world is in constant flux, we need to lean back on our own sense of creativity. So you can awaken this in yourself as well. So in summary, we should deal with uncertainty by leading with context, by providing our teams with the context around the problem that they're solving. And this goes all the way up into companies management. We deal with volatility by enabling discovery, giving our teams problems to solve instead of features to build, and then letting them use their creative powers in order to be able to figure out the best way to solve those problems. We deal with the complexity by enforcing constraints, by giving our teams boxes to work within and making the problem space smaller. And we deal with ambiguity by embracing difference, by having teams with diverse backgrounds that can look at the problem from a lot of different perspectives in order to be able to figure out the best solution. And then in the middle of it all, we get really, really good at resilience, at bouncing back and starting again. If one solution doesn't work out, we take another solution and another solution and another solution. And lastly, action is more important than no action. So we always play the next move because that's the only thing we can focus on. If you ever played a game of Tetris, that's the role of the leader. You don't know what bricks will be coming, but simply standing there and letting the bricks fall is always the wrong move. Taking the brick and putting it somewhere is better than putting it nowhere. So always play the current move and make sure to be on the move. If you did enjoy this session, I've also recently started a podcast together with Ebba Lauren called Leading in Flux. We only have one pilot episode out, but I'm working on editing the next episode. And it tackles precisely these things. It tackles the problems of living and leading in changing times and what we as leaders need to deal with those things. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Hope there's some cool questions.
All right. Joachim has a question. Would the You Get Pizza work for the generation Y and Z? The X ones were the ones just chewing and doing. That's a good one. So would the Get Pizza work for the millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah, I think it would if you painted the correct, compelling vision. So I mean, this is probably a deeper thing than we can tackle in an answer to a question. But incentives have shifted away. We used to be a generation of people who were happy with doing a good job, and we took pride in our work. The craftspeople, so to say. But now we're faced with a generation that want to have a positive impact on the world. So you need to be able to figure out what their drive and motivation is, and also frame the work in a way where they feel that they're actually making that change happen. Right? They're not really interested in shipping the product. They're probably more interested in saving the ocean. This is kind of the thing. But then there's also a whole psychological aspect to this, where research shows that this new generation also isn't feeling very well. So the issue that happens is, people in my age, 40 to 50, that are supposedly, we're supposedly go through a midlife crisis and be, on the verge of burnout. We're doing really well because we've seen crises before. But the young generation coming into the workforce right now, their whole life has been a constant crisis. So they're actually not feeling very well. So we have a bunch of leaders that lead people and think that everybody's just doing fine, and they're not. So you need to give, if you're working with younger people, you might need a lot of psychological support for them. You might need to lead them from a different perspective. But I mean, that's a whole separate talk on this. I could talk about the generational differences for an hour.
Yeah, I see. Maybe that's an idea for the next one. But I have two more questions. So Vanda asked, you talked about discovery versus delivery. Do you have any tips on how do we determine the amount of time spent on researching and testing all the new tools and technology without it overflowing the regular workflow in our team?
So you have to flip that on its head, because this is the regular workflow. So if your team, so the thing is, if you run a team this way, the discovery is going to be the work you deliver. So not the whole team should be working with the discovery work, but there's probably a subset of the team that rotates and works with discovery. But if there's nothing discovered, we have nothing to deliver. So what I sometimes see, I'm not sure if this is kind of a background to this question. I'll be happy to take a talk afterwards. That teams have like a backlog of features they need to deliver, and they try to do discovery work on top of that. But that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that you do the discovery work, you do the experiments. Once you figure out what you're trying to build, you start implementing that thing. And then you continue doing discovery work to see if anything's changed. You continue looking at the data you get back, you continue looking at the trends happening, and you constantly recheck the work you're doing in case you need to pivot any of that. So this means kind of getting rid of the backlog, or these are the features we need to deliver idea, and moving to this is the problem we need to solve. Because if the features you're building currently would not solve the user's problem, like if you discover that they will not solve the user's problem, you should stop working on them immediately. So, I mean, that's a very complicated way of saying it's not simply adding discovery to a feature team. It's completely flipping the way of how you work on its head.
All right, Vanda, I hope that answered your question. If you still have anything else, just write it in the chat or raise your hand to talk with Martin directly.
Yeah,
And
or
then
reach out
in
to
the
me and we can take
meantime,
a one-on-one.
oh, she would love that. She's a knowledge seeker. And Jane asked, one common constraint added is time. How do you feel that works in your experience to add constraints?
Time is an interesting one. I like time, but time has to be paired with the freedom to work on solving a problem. Because time as a constraint doesn't work if the amount of work is fixed. So, for instance, if we're trying to launch a new product and you add the constraint of, this is actually a true story, you take away 90% of the resources, meaning you also take away 90% of the time. This happened to me. And you want to launch a new product, an MVP on the market. Like a creative solution to that would be to actually not launch the product. It would be to create the marketing page with kind of like, hey, sign up for this product today. And then when people try to sign up, it says like, oh, sorry, like we're full and we're not taking more signups. And then to use that data to get more resources, to get more money or get more time. So you need to be able to think creatively about the problem when the time constraints are imposed. But if you have a fixed feature set, you need to build these 10 features. Oh, and all of a sudden I need them by Friday. That's not going to be productive. But if you tell me you want to solve this problem and I need it done by Friday, we have a fighting chance to figure out a cool way of doing that.
That makes sense, yeah. I do have one more question. If anybody else has any questions, write them. Now's your chance. And in the meantime, I want to ask you, Martin, when working with a team, how would you address uncertainty without causing any worry or stress for your team?
Honestly, I think that's where a lot of leaders kind of misstep. And I think this comes from classical management and leadership training where you're supposed to have all the answers. So leaders are generally pretty afraid of standing up and saying like, hey, this thing happened. Like, COVID or a war is happening and it's affecting our company or our product this way. I don't know what the solution is, but, here are, the things that we know right now, and I'm inviting you to be part of solving this problem. And I think those types of honest conversations are going to mobilize the team in order to work to figure out the problem in a better way. And and I take this analogy of talking about threats as threats, because a lot of leaders say, "Oh, there are no threats. There's only opportunities." That's bullshit. Like, there's plenty of threats. Like, if I walk in the woods and I see a bear, that's a threat. And me trying to sell that as an opportunity to, get a new rug if I manage to kill the bear, it's a dumb idea. So when you see threats, when you see things that are threats to your business, acknowledge that they're threats, and then, figure out ways of solving them.
I love that. It's an opportunity to gain your physical strength and run from the bear faster.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw it was bullshit when I started talking. Okay, I think that's all the time we have for today, unless anybody else has any questions for Martin. He answered everything, right? That was pretty solid answer, so thank you for that. Thank you everyone who joined us today. I hope to see you on the next one. Stay tuned. We will let you know what the next webinar is on our social media. And a big applause for Martin, because you really nailed it. And thank you so much for this insightful webinar, Martin.
Thank you all for coming, and hit me up on social media if you want to chat.
All right, have a great one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.